the fracture. In the stillness between flame and tide, there was once balance. Before the suns rose and the moons waxed, before names were given to river and stone, hidden earth breathed through two elemental forces, fire and water, not as rivals, but as rhythm. It was the heart of the horizon, a living relic carved from steric and ocean crystal that anchored the accord between them. It pulsed of the temple of equinox, where the emberlands met the tidelands, where orchid and tidecler once walked side by side. But peace is a fragile tide, easily broken by the wind and ambition. The heart trembled, not with ceremony, not with reverence, but with pain. Inside the temple of equinox, once alive with chanting flame priests and ocean keepers, the sacred chamber lay hollowed. Columns of obsidian and coral rose like ribs of a forgotten beast. The heart floated at the center, a translucent orb humming with swirling firelight and liquid stars, tethered by threads of ember and brined to the four cardinal altars. It was meant to sing in harmony. Now it shrieked in silence. A figure stood alone in the shadows of the chamber, cloaked in crimson trimmed with black sea silk. Their face was hidden beneath an obsidian veil, eyes glowing with a violet flame not born of either court. One hand stretched forward, trembling, eager, as the heart began to crack. A thin fissure glowed across its surface, then another, then 100 more. The accord shattered with a soundless scream. Waves died far from the coast. Volcanoes stirred with sleepless hunger. The temple groaned as if its foundations knew what had been done. The figure withdrew, cloak rippling like a serpent in retreat, and whispered a single word into the cold chamber, "Awaken," and then they were gone. Far to the west, in the Emberlands, fire danced unnaturally across the skies, splitting clouds in red lightning. The Ember Court gathered in their spires, mistaking the shift for omen, for prophecy. The flames had grown bolder. To the east, in the tidelands, sea beasts howled from the deeps, and salt turned bitter in the mouths of the tidecoolers. Storms churned without wind. Rivers ceased to sing. The spirits wailed beneath the waves. None yet knew what had truly happened. But balance had been broken, and hidden earth would never be the same. Chapter 1, Ash on the Waves. The sky above Zarethkai hung heavy like soaked cloth, pale and silent, stretched over the bones of a dying day. The wind, once briny and full of the ocean's secrets, carried only the dry bite of ash. Kelter, the blue-skinned troll shaman, stood at the edge of the coral cliffs where surf met stone, where children used to leap for sport and whales once breached in joy. Now the water below was sluggish, thick, lifeless. The tide had forgotten to return. He knelt and placed a hand to the shallow pool at his feet. It barely lapped against his skin, as if reluctant to touch him. His fingers glowed faintly, streaked with the spiraling glyphs of his lineage, born of ocean spirits and storm blood. The glyphs had begun to fade. Behind him, the village of Zarethkai stirred with unrest. Fires were not lit, drums were not sung. Even the waves had grown shy. Nets lay dry, and woven boats rocked without direction. Fisherwomen whispered prayers with cracked lips. The waterfall that once roared down the cliffs behind the village now trickled, confused and starved. Kelter came a soft voice, younger, uncertain. He turned to see his brother, Narrow, approaching with a bundle of kelp and driftwood charms. His hair was tied back in the style of apprentices, and his tunic bore the fresh marks of one who had just entered the caller's path. "She's retreating," Narrow said, his voice barely a breeze. "The ocean?" "She's afraid." Kelter's jaw tightened. "She's not afraid. She's in pain." That night, under a moonless sky, the tideclers gathered beneath the towering shell spire, the living coral monument that had grown for 1,000 years beside the cliffs. It stood taller than any tree, lit from within by pulsing bioluminescence that normally matched the rhythm of the sea. But tonight it glowed erratically, flickering, confused. Elder Valagin, whose eyes had seen 3 generations rise and fall with the tide, stood before them in robes of weaved sea thread, her voice like sand through fingers. "The heart is broken," she said. The circle of shamans stirred in disbelief. "The heart of the horizon," someone gasped. Kelter's thoughts raced. That couldn't be. The heart had been protected for millennia, suspended in the temple of equinox by both tide and flame. It was the anchor of the accord, the promise that neither side would rise while the other drowned. "It has fractured," Valagin continued, eyes closed. "I felt at the moment the waves fell silent. We all did. The spirits are restless. The balance we swore to protect has been lost." A wave of dread fell over the gathering. "We must act," said Caller Jara, voice sharp and rising. "War will come from the Emberlands." "It always does when balance falters." "No," Valagin said. "Not war. Not yet. We must seek knowledge. Before the storm comes understanding." Her eyes fell upon Kilter. "You, child of the deep, are chosen." The wind howled as Kilter stood at the edge of the world. A single carved canoe resting on the dark waves before him. Nero watched from the rocks above, holding the totem they'd carved together as boys, a serpent rising through a spiral wave. "To the Reef of Echoes," Valagin said, placing a hand on Kilter's chest over his fading glyphs. "You will dive where the ancients sleep. You will speak with those who remember the first storm." He looked toward the horizon. 1,000 miles of sea and secrets lay between him and the truth. "I will return," he said, voice steady. "I do not doubt it," she replied. "But you will not return the same." Kelter stepped into the boat. The tide, weak though it was, finally stirred. It was calling him. Chapter 2. The Flameborn Air. The fire never slept in Alaris. It roared through the stone veins of the citadel, coiling beneath the obsidian bridges and seeping through every crack in the lava-carved towers. The Emberlands breathed heat, not air, and its people had learned long ago to do the same. High above the molten rivers that wound like glowing scars through the mountains, the Ember Court convened beneath a sunless sky, lit only by the ever-burning pyre of sovereigns. Here, fire did not merely illuminate, it judged. And seated just below the central dais, her chin high and her thoughts burning brighter than her spellfire, was Lyrian of the Orchid line. She did not wear her flame, she was her flame. It danced along the edges of her crimson-inked skin, laced through her deep orchid purple hair, and lived in the measured grace of her gaze. Younger than the other registers, yet unmatched in arcane precision, Lyrian was a sorceress of both elegance and elemental dominance. The court called her gifted. Privately, they whispered another word: dangerous. The tide grows silent, droned Magister Syrinx, a gaunt man robed in flame-scarred silk. Their waves do not crash against our border cliffs. The ocean withholds itself. It is weakness, and weakness invites flame. A ripple of low approval passed through the assembled nobles. "But the accord," began Lady Ashen, voice brittle. "The accord," Syrinx snapped, died the moment the heart faltered. At the mention of the heart of the horizon, silence fell. All eyes turned toward the high dais where High Flame Mother Saraneth stood. None dared question her presence. She was the ember made flesh. "Balance is not peace," Saraneth said, her voice smooth yet razor-edged. "Balance is a stall, a truce, a waiting." She turned her gaze to Lyrian. "And waiting is over." In the obsidian sanctum of her chambers, Lyrian knelt before a basin of whispering fire. Her hands moved in slow spirals, drawing out visions that looked across the air in flickering scenes, dying waves, blackened reefs, and the twisted remnants of what once was a great temple. But more than that, she saw her, a figure cloaked in flame darker than night, seated upon a throne of ash and glowing roots. The vision came often now, a woman with her same eyes, same voice, yet ancient, commanding, crowned in wildfire and wreathed in violet orchids. The first flame queen, long forgotten, long buried. You are my echo, child, the queen's whisper came. You are the flame they fear. Later, she stood alone on the edge of the flame towers, where the horizon cracked and shimmered with heat. Marshal Varan, a battle-hardened commander clad in fireplate, approached and bowed. You are to lead the Scorchwing Vanguard. Orders from the High Flame Mother. You will march on Flareth Bay and secure the tide front. For diplomacy, she said. Lyrian did not turn. She means conquest. Varan grunted. You see clearly. She nodded slowly. Then I will burn clearly. In the central hall of Alaris, beneath the flame sigil, the orchid sorceress mounted her phoenix-tempered war steed and cast one final look upon the ember spires of her home, not with pride, but with hunger. Chapter 3, The Burnt Shore. The winds over Flareth Bay no longer carried salt, they carried soot. Where once the tide had curled gently into hidden coves and pearl-lined sands, now the water sloshed in oily ripples beneath skies bruised with ember smoke. The trees that lined the cliffs, the sacred tidewood sentinels, bent low, their roots scorched and steaming. At the southern headland, jagged sails cut across the bay like serrated knives. Ember galleons, obsidian-hulled and flame-proud, dropped anchor just beyond the reef. The Scorchwing Vanguard had arrived. Kelter crouched beside the body of a silver-scale sea beast, its massive form beached and gasping. The creature's eyes had long since faded, its gills blistered shut by heat. The glyphs on Kelter's arms pulsed faintly in mourning. Behind him, the villagers of Shell Cove scrambled to gather what they could, preparing to flee inland. The Tidiclers stood firm along the bluffs, warriors cloaked in salt thread, bearing tridents carved from deep-sea bones and storm-forged coral. They hummed to the waves, coaxing strength from a sea that had grown wary. They bring war, said Caller Inna, her braid adorned with rainstones, and they do not come to speak. Kelta rose slowly. His storm-marked hands clenched, his thoughts still haunted by the broken vision of the heart. He had not yet reached the reef of echoes. But he could not ignore the blaze approaching. We hold the shore, he said. Lyrian, the young female sorceress with deep orchid purple hair, crimson-inked skin, a graceful build, and an intense gaze, wearing elegant robes suitable for a magister, dismounted onto scorched sand, her armored boots hissing where they touched the edge of surf. The tide pulled back from her, instinctively recoiling from the magic that hummed around her, a quiet, constant flame beneath her skin. The Emberlands had not seen this coast in 100 years. She felt the echo of history in the rocks, the bones of fallen flame walkers buried beneath the silt. This had once been theirs. Now it would be again. Marshal Varan stood beside her, surveying the distant ridge. Defenders in position, a mix of shamans, weavers, and tide hunters. Do not strike unless provoked, Lyrian said, though her words were quieter than the fire in her chest. Let them believe they have time. The parley was held at the river of sunsmoke, where molten runoff met ocean tide. Kelter approached on foot, staff in hand, his tide glyphs bright in the midday light. Beside him, Caller Inna whispered warnings. That one, she said, nodding toward Lyrian, burns without remorse. Their eyes met, Lyrian's and Kelter's. The world hushed. She looked like no Ember General Kelter had seen in ancestral visions, not brutal, not crude, but refined, radiant, controlled, a flame that listened before it burned, and yet, she tilted her head, curious. You're not afraid of me? Kelter's voice was steady. I've spoken with storms. You're quieter than most. A flicker of something crossed her lips, amusement or interest, but it passed. We claim this bay by right of imbalance, Lyrian said. Your tide retreats. Ours surges forward. The tide retreats only to rise higher, Keltor replied. What happened next was not Lyrian's plan. A bolt of fire, wild and unsummoned, shot from the ridge behind her. A reckless Ember acolyte, young, untrained, lashed out. The fire arced. It struck the ground near Kelter, detonating into the shrine behind him, a sacred tide pool mirror, its waters used for spirit communion. The shrine shattered. The tidal spirits howled in the sudden void. Kelter roared, not in pain, but fury. And the waves answered. Battle broke like a tidal scream. Water surged upward, slamming into ember vanguards. Flame lashed back, boiling sea foam into steam. The sand turned to glass beneath their feet. Coral shattered, trees burned, spirits screamed from both elements. Kelter moved like the sea, fluid, powerful, unrelenting. He summoned a whirlpool shield that swallowed fire and shattered armor, but Lyrian's command was absolute. She weaved fire into shape, arcs, blades, serpents, cutting paths through even enchanted mist. They met again amid the chaos, not as diplomats, but as wielders of their people's fury. Their magic collided, not to destroy, but to measure. For a moment, as the tide clashed with flame, the world held its breath. Then came the retreat, broken on both sides, littered with smoldering wreckage and flooded trenches. That night, Kelter knelt beside the ruins of the shrine. The tide had gone quiet, the ocean confused. He whispered to the pool's broken edge, "I felt her power, but I also felt her pause." And far away, Lyrian sat alone beside her command fire, her eyes not on her soldiers, but on the sea. "She did not strike first," she murmured. In that single scorched day, both had seen something unexpected in the other, not hatred, but warning. And within that warning, something dangerously close to recognition. Chapter 4, Stormblood. The canoe glided through waters darker than night. Above Kelter, clouds strangled the sky, casting the sea in perpetual dusk. Below him, silence, no fish, no reef song, just the yawning, unknowable void. He was alone now, not by distance, but by right. The elders of Zarethkai had sent him forth with no weapons, no companions, and no glyphs beyond the fading light in his skin. Even his staff had been left behind. All he carried were the whispered prayers of his brother Nero, and a woven tide knot around his wrist, a charm of sea hair, bone, and stormglass. Before him, rising like a jagged tooth from the sea, loomed the reef of echoes. A maze of black coral, shipwrecked bones, and ancient leviathan ribs. The reef was where the deep ancients were said to sleep, not gods, but elemental forces given form, storms with memories, currents with hunger. And Kelter had come to speak with them. He dove. The water greeted him not as an ally, but as a judge. Cold closed over his body like stone. His lungs screamed before the first prayer was complete. But he did not surface. He sank deeper than light, deeper than time. Beneath him, bioluminescent eyes blinked in the dark. Tentacles coiled away in shadow, and then the reef opened. He passed through bone arches and drifted between coral spires, etched with tide runes older than language. The walls pulsed with visions, memories of ancient pacts, of ember sorcerers and tidiclers, once fighting side by side against the skyborn Leviath, a terror of cloud and fire long since buried beneath the waves. And in the deepest chamber of the reef, he found her. The Leviathan's womb cracked. From the pool, a voice rose, not spoken, but felt. A massive chamber of pearlescent shell, spiraling like a galaxy. At its center, a pool of silver blue liquid swirling with stormlight. The air buzzed. The glyphs on Kelter's skin flared. Then, "Why do you come, child of the shallows?" He dropped to his knees. "To ask for your blessing," he answered aloud. "To restore the balance. To protect the sea from what burns." The voice rippled through him like lightning through bone. "You come in grief, you come in vengeance. What will you give, Kelter of Zarethkai?" He lowered his gaze. "My breath, my name, my shape, all if needed." A long silence followed. Then, drown. The liquid surged. His scream never reached the surface. Kelter was pulled under, into the pool, into the womb of storms. Lightning coiled through his veins. His heartbeat matched the pulse of the tides. Visions tore through his mind, Lyrian flames dancing from her fingertips. The heart of the horizon, cracked and weeping light. A serpent of smoke slithering through the temple of Equinox. The ocean carved its memory into him. His body convulsed, then quieted. When Kelter emerged from the sea, it was not as he entered. His skin shimmered with new glyphs, deeper, glowing with storm-glass veins. His eyes, once ocean blue, now held flickers of lightning. Water no longer clung to him. It obeyed him. He stood atop the reef, wind and rain swirling around him in reverence. From the sky above, thunder echoed, not as warning, but as welcome. He had been claimed by the Leviathan, and the tide would rise with him. Chapter 5, Orchid Thorns. The banners of the Scorchwing Vanguard fluttered in the heat like wounded birds. Their camp spread across the charred ridges of the tideland border, just above the now silent river of sunsmoke. War tents had been erected on ground that still bled steam from where Kale Tor's waters met Lyrian's flame. No birds sang in the canopy. No insects buzzed. Even the fireflies avoided the smoke. Lyrian, the young female sorceress, wearing elegant robes suitable for a magister, stood alone in her war pavilion, surrounded by maps and heat-faded parchments, but her thoughts were elsewhere, behind her eyes, where memory and flame danced like twin serpents. The vision had returned again last night. The first Flame Queen, cloaked in burning orchids, seated on a throne of black blossoms and cinders. Her voice, Lyrian's voice, older and crowned, had whispered, "You are not here to speak. You are here to scorch the roots of what they believe." But for the first time, Lyrian had not welcomed the Queen. She stepped outside, needing air, needing distance from prophecy and chain. Across the ridge, the aftermath of the battle still lingered, shattered coral, vitrified sand, and small shrines crushed beneath fire and hoof. She descended carefully, leaving behind her guards, tracing the path toward a ruined tide shrine tucked beneath an overhang of stone. A charred prayer bell hung from a half-melted arch. Beneath it, burnt offerings, driftwood idols of sea spirits still smoldering. She knelt, brushing away soot to reveal carved names in an old dialect, names that shimmered faintly with ocean glyphs, children's names, Commander. The voice startled her. She turned to see Coriniel, a junior fireseer, stepping hesitantly into view. His face was pale beneath his war paint, his flame blade sheathed. "What is it?" Lyrian asked. "There's something you should see." They walked to a nearby glade where the fire had not fully taken root. Within a half-burnt shrine grove, the Ember soldiers had unearthed a forgotten structure, half-sunken stone, etched with both flame runes and tidal glyphs. A shared temple, hidden beneath the roots of the jungle. The flames that had tried to consume it had failed. The stone still pulsed, faintly alive. "What is this place?" Corin asked. Lyrian stepped inside the broken doorway, running her fingers across the wall. She found an inscription at the center, a spiral of fire and water, united in a dance of opposing strokes. It was the symbol of the Accord, older than any she had seen. And above it, a name chiseled in both tongues, Saraneth, her breath caught. The High Flame Mother's name, her mentor, her patron, her deceiver. Later that night, Lyrian stood in her tent, hands trembling. Scrolls from the Ember archives lay open documents she'd been given during her ascent through the orchid ranks. They told a different version of history, one where the Tidecolors had broken the Accord, not the flame, one where Saraneth's rise had come not with peace, but with conquest buried beneath red tongued retellings. And yet, the hidden temple told another story. They once stood together, Lyrian thought. We were once whole. The visions of the first Flame Queen returned, not as destiny, but as warning. Lyrian looked at her hands, flame, always flame, but no longer certain what it was burning for. By dawn, she had given her first secret order, no more raids without her approval. And she had begun writing a letter, one that would never reach Alaris, in which she asked a single, forbidden question: what if the tide was never the enemy? Chapter 6. Twilight Currents. Twilight bled softly through the jungle, spilling violet gold across the high ridges and tangled roots of the Mistvale expanse. Here, deep between enemy lines, no banners flew. No drums sounded, only silence rolled, thick, waiting, full of memory. Kelter moved like a current between the ferns, the glyphs on his arms flickering with soft stormlight. The jungle whispered to him, streams, frogs, roots, echoes of raindrops yet to fall. He followed them like a path toward something he couldn't name. The storm within him had grown louder. Since the rite, he could feel the ocean's moods more sharply. The world trembled with imbalance. Even the smallest springs wept in warning. He had come alone, drawn not by duty or strategy, but by instinct. And that instinct now led him to a pool. It lay nestled in a broken glade, where tide met jungle, still and mirror smooth. An old tide shrine half collapsed, overgrown with ivy and orchid bloom. The water pulsed faintly, reflecting not the sky above, but strange firelight beneath. Kelter stopped. Someone was already there. Lyrian stood at the far end of the pool, her reflection warped by the ripples. Her armor was gone. She wore a sleeveless robe of ember thread, embroidered with sigils that shimmered dimly in the evening light. Her hair, unbound, curled over her shoulders like slow flame. She didn't look like a commander. She looked like a question. Kelter stepped forward without drawing his blade. "You returned," he said quietly. Lyrian didn't flinch. "You came alone." "We both did." A long silence passed between them. Then she spoke. "They told me you would be a monster of salt and rage, that you would drown me without a word. And mine told me you would burn without remorse." Another pause. "I haven't burned today," she added softly. He nodded. "And I have not drowned anything I didn't have to." She turned toward him slowly, studying his face, his eyes, now streaked with lightning, bright and unreadable. "You changed," she said. "So did you." Lyrian hesitated, then pulled a scroll from her satchel. "I found this in a collapsed temple near the sun smoke. It bears both our people's scripts. It tells of a time before the war, a time when flame and tide did not war, but shared the world." Kelter stepped closer, watching her, wary. "Why show me this? Because I think they've lied to both of us." She placed the scroll on a stone. Serenith knew. She was part of the first accord. Her name is etched into the foundation stone alongside a Tideclar elder. "I've seen the same glyphs beneath the reef," Kelter murmured. "Your people helped build the balance. Now they're tearing it down." "No," Lyrian said. "We're tearing it down." The admission burned her tongue, but it rang with truth. They stood now on the razor's edge between tradition and truth. Kelter knelt beside the pool. "This water remembers. It holds echoes. Show it truth, and it shows you truth in return." He brushed his fingers across the surface. Visions bloomed, the heart of the horizon, once whole and glowing. A younger Serenith and a Tideclar weaving a ritual of balance together. Then shadows, one cloaked in both flame and void, corrupting the heart from within. Not fire, not tide, something else. Lyrian inhaled sharply. "That figure... who was it?" Kelter rose. "I don't know, but I've felt them in my storms. Beneath my skin. They're not from your people," she whispered. "Nor yours." The pool went still. Kelter turned to leave. "So what now?" Lyrian asked, her voice brittle. Lyrian inhaled sharply. "That figure... who was it?" Kelter. "We stopped being their weapons," he said. Then he paused. "Next time we meet, we won't be enemies," she finished. "Only if you keep your flame in check." Only if you keep your tide at bay. A flicker of something passed between them, not trust, not yet, but the shape of it. As the twilight deepened, Kelter vanished into the jungle mists. Lyrian remained by the pool, her hand over the scroll, flamelight dimming at her fingertips. Somewhere, far beneath the earth, the broken heart pulsed once. And for the first time in an age, the tide and flame had spoken without fire. Chapter 7. The Leviathan and the Phoenix. The Temple of Equinox lay buried beneath a mountain wrapped in mist, hidden where flame never reached and tide never surged. Neither court spoke of it now. Maps had scrubbed it clean. Histories called it a myth, but it was real, and it was waking. Kelter stood at the mouth of the stone tunnel, his breath ghosting in the cold. Beside him, Lyrian adjusted her crimson cloak, not out of need, but discomfort. The air in the mountains tasted nothing like fire or salt. It was still, watching. Between them stood the threshold, an arched passage lined with runes that shimmered between emberlight and rainglow, ever shifting. The script is both yours and mine, Kelter murmured. Lyrian ran her hand across the entrance. It was meant to be read together. They stepped through. Inside, time had twisted the place into a sleeping beast. Coral and obsidian entwined along every wall. Ivy and soot coexisted in strange harmony. The inner chamber pulsed with elemental energy too old for names, as if the bones of hidden earth were humming beneath their feet. They moved through echoing halls, past murals depicting ancient rituals. They saw flame shapers and tide weavers dancing together beneath twin moons. Children of both factions playing at the edge of rivers fed by lava and ice. Then came the great atrium, a vaulted dome of translucent crystal. At its center, a suspended relic of impossible beauty. It was not the heart of the horizon, but its twin. A second orb, dormant, carved of celestial pearl and glowing emberstone, bound in place by ribbons of magic from both elements. Above it floated two immense sculptures, one of a great sea serpent coiled in serene defense, the other a firebird mid-descent, wings arched in eternal flame. The Leviathan and the Phoenix, guardians of balance. Memory incarnate. As Kelter approached, the air thickened with water. As Lyrian stepped forward, heat shimmered through the crystal walls. Together they touched the orb, and the world remembered. The visions struck like lightning. They were not dreams, not prophecy, memories of the land itself. The creation of the twin hearts by ancient elemental sages. The first accord, signed in rain and fire, uniting the flame and tide against a primordial threat, a void being from beyond the stars known only as the World Forge. The World Forge, a hunger, a sentient abyss that consumed balance to fuel chaos, feeding off division, hate, imbalance. And the betrayal, not by tide or flame, but by something wearing their shape. A cloaked figure, half flame and half shadow, had shattered the original heart and poisoned its twin, setting in motion the war that would sunder the elements. Kelter's voice cracked through the vision. The World Forge still stirs beneath us. Lyrian turned pale, eyes glowing. And Saraneth. She knew. The chamber rumbled. Cracks split across the floor. Flame shot upward in jets. Water gushed through the walls. The temple shuddered as the relic pulsed with new light, awakened by their bond. The sculptures of Leviathan and Phoenix glowed, and from their mouths came words, spoken as one. You are echoes of what was. You are keys to what must be. Restore the heart or lose the world. The light vanished. The orb went dark. And silence claimed the chamber once more. Outside the temple, the wind howled with new hunger. Lyrian looked at Kelter. We're not just soldiers anymore. He nodded. We're the only ones who remember the truth. Chapter 8, The Ember Rebellion. The spire of Alaris had never known silence. Its halls rang always with the crackle of fire, the stomp of flame-armored boots, the chanting of sorceress rites. But as Lyrian stepped beneath its obsidian archways, cloak ash-drenched, eyes storm-shadowed, the silence greeted her like an omen. Flames dimmed in her wake. She had returned alone, no banners, no escort, no trophies, only purpose. Word of her unsanctioned journey to the Temple of Equinox had preceded her. Whispers crackled through the corridors like sparks searching for dry grass. Her name, once uttered with reverence, now came wrapped in suspicion. She found her chambers ransacked, scrolls missing. Her cinder-spine staff, the one given to her by the Orchid Circle, broken and left across her bed like a warning. But she was past fear. In the High Court, beneath the flame-ringed dais, High Flame Mother Saraneth stood cloaked in shimmering scarlet, her gaze sharp as glass drawn from fire. She looked upon Lyrian as one might a broken weapon. You disobeyed direct orders. You consorted with the tide. You speak of unity when fire must purge. Saraneth said, voice cold beneath its heat. I saw the truth, Lyrian replied. The heart was not broken by them. It was broken by you. Gasps hissed through the court. Not even the fire dared crackle. Saraneth stepped forward. You speak treason. I speak memory, Lyrian said. The memory the land itself showed me. She unfurled the scroll she had carried from the temple, a joint flame-tied accord bearing Saraneth's name etched in both languages. The same Saraneth who had since denied such history existed. Cries erupted. Arguments flared. Lyrian didn't wait for permission. She summoned flame, not to attack, but to illuminate. Her fire burst upward, shaping itself not into a weapon, but a phoenix. It flew in a burning arc above the heads of the nobles, illuminating the ancient glyphs hidden on the court's stone pillars, old seals of unity, long forgotten, now revealed. Outside, in the training circles and forges, the younger sorceresses began to gather, drawn by her fire. They had lost sisters at Flareth Bay. They had seen the cruelty behind the cleansing campaigns. They had questions, and Lyrian had answers. The orchid flame was never meant to consume, she told them. It was meant to bloom alongside the tide. She led them not in revolt, but in awakening. By moonrise, the Ember Rebellion had begun. It was not a civil war, not yet, but it was a fracture. A crack in the spire, a choice. Some stayed loyal to Saraneth, denouncing Lyrian as corrupted. Others followed Lyrian into the old flame gardens, where fire had once been sacred, not savage. There, they rebuilt the original circle of the Ember Accord, weaving magic not for war, but for healing. For the first time in centuries, orchid fire danced without burning. Far to the east, beneath the storming skies of the Tidelands, Kael'thir stood before the united tribes of the coast, the Tideclers, the Rain Chanters, the Coralborn. His body now shimmered with storm-etched glyphs, his voice carrying the weight of the deep. The heart lives, he told them, but it bleeds. He recounted the visions, the betrayal, the awakening of the Leviathan, and of Lyrian, the sorceress of flame who had not struck. At first there was outrage, fury, but also hesitation. And when Kael'thir raised his hand to the sea, and it rose with him, without chant, without command, they saw. He was tideward born, not just a caller, not just a shaman, a voice of the ocean itself. And so the tide began to gather. In hidden coves and broken groves, the storm met the spark. And in the shadows between tide and flame, something new began to rise. Not war, not peace, but a reckoning. Chapter 9, When Flame Drowns. The shore of Sundering was not a place of peace. It had never been. It was where the accord had first been forged in blood and balance, and where it had first been betrayed. Now the sea raged against molten cliffs, the sky torn between storm and smoke. Lightning struck from above, lava bled from below. The world was unmaking itself, and both Kael'thir and Lyrian stood at its heart. On the cliffs above the shore, The Tidiclers gathered, a storm-wrapped host of tribes and spirits, sea beasts and coral-bladed warriors. Kelter stood at their front, eyes shining like lightning swallowed by the sea. Rain slicked across his skin, but the storm no longer touched him. He had become its echo. Below, across the black sands, marched the flame-bound remnants of the Ember Court and those loyal to Saraneth, their red banners streaked with soot, their flames unnatural, pulsing with something wrong, hollow, hungrier than flame should be. Between them, the surf churned, and beneath the sand, something stirred. Lyrian stood alone at the border. Her followers, the reclaimed flame, now calling themselves Ashbloom Sisters, remained behind her, uncertain. The tide smelled like sorrow. The fire behind her felt cold. She raised her hand. "Wait," she commanded. Saraneth descended from the ash spires above the cliffs, her presence an unnatural blaze, not fire, but corruption masquerading as flame. Her eyes glowed with an amber hue that did not flicker. Her voice came hollow. "You would betray your own to kneel before the tide." Lyrian didn't answer with words. She stepped into the surf. Kelter approached her. Neither raised a weapon. In silence, they stood where ocean and fire met, not clashing, but folding into one another for a single moment, balanced. Then came the tremor. From the sand beneath their feet, the world forge rose. It did not erupt. It emerged, a colossal rootwork of obsidian and void glass, pulsing with anti-light. It screamed in no language, yet every soul heard it, hunger eternal and deep. It fed on their imbalance, and it had been waiting for this convergence. Fire turned gray, water turned black, the tide recoiled. Flames flickered and died. The army screamed as reality fractured, the sky folding inward, stars bleeding from the cracks. And still the world forge rose. Saraneth stood at its base, arms wide. "She will burn it all to remake the world," Lyrian whispered. "She thinks she can control it," Kelter said. "She is wrong." He turned to the shore behind him. "Ready the tide, protect the living." She turned to hers. "I will deal with her." The final battle began. Kelter summoned a wall of stormlight to shield his warriors, drawing water from every river, every spring. The Tidiclers held fast, their magic interwoven, crashing against void beasts rising from the forge's core, creatures made of imbalance, neither element nor spirit, but absence given form. Lyrian faced Saraneth alone. Fire against flame. Sorcery against ruin. "You were born of me," Saraneth hissed, her voice not hers. "I was born of truth," Lyrian answered and ignited herself. She burned, not to destroy, but to cleanse. Orchid flame burst from her core, spiraling in a helix of arcane light. She struck Saraneth with every lie she had shed, every memory reclaimed. And then she turned her power inward. Lyrian tore the corrupted glyphs from her own soul, and with them, the tether Saraneth had used to anchor the world forge's hunger. A scream like molten stars rang through the land. Saraneth crumbled, not into ash, but memory, scattered like embers caught in the tide. But the world forge still remained. It pulsed with new hunger, roots reaching for the sky, the sea, the heart. Kelter turned to Lyrian, bleeding, burned, radiant. She held out her hand. "Together," she said. He took it. They channeled everything they had, flame and tide, Leviathan and Phoenix. The heart of the horizon, far to the south, responded. Its twin, buried in the Temple of Equinox, awakened. The two hearts pulsed as one, and the energy between them collapsed the world forge in a scream of equilibrium. Not destruction, but restoration. Light tore through the land, time reset. And then silence. The beach was still, rain fell softly. Where the world forge once stood, there was only sand. Lyrian collapsed into Kelter's arms, her flames extinguished. "I gave it everything," she whispered. "I know," he replied. He held her as the tide returned, not in rage, but in peace. Epilogue, balance reclaimed. A year had passed since the shore of Sundering bled its last scream into the sea. The skies above hidden earth were no longer torn between storm and smoke. The clouds still rolled, and the volcanoes still breathed, but now they did so in rhythm, as if some ancient breath had resumed, as if the world had, at last, remembered how to breathe together. In the heart of the tidelands on the cliffs of Zarethkai, a new monument stood, half coral, half obsidian, spiraling upward like a flame embraced by a wave. Children played beneath it, splashing in shallow tide pools laced with ember lily, while spirits hummed lullabies in the reeds. Kelter stood beside the monument, bare-chested, tattoos now deep blue and gold, no longer glowing with pain, but with presence. He was no longer just a tideigler. He was tidewarden now, guardian of both memory and motion, chosen by the Leviathan to ensure the sea never forgot, and that the tide never again became a weapon wielded blindly. Behind him, the high shamans of every tribe, once divided by borders and wounds, stood in silent unity. For the first time in 1,000 years, the sea had one voice, and it spoke of peace. Far across the sea, in the gardens of the rekindled spire, the reborn seat of the orchid sorceresses, Lyrian walked barefoot through new blooms. Her hair had grown long again, streaked now with pale silver among the violet, and her flames were gone, not lost, laid down. She had surrendered the last of her magic to the heart, closing the world forge's wound with her very soul. But in return, she had gained something more profound than fire, choice. The Ashbloom sisters had followed her, abandoning conquest for cultivation. They no longer burned. They grew, teaching old flame rites, healing soils scorched by war, and whispering songs once banned by the Ember Court, where fire had once ruled by fear. Now it warmed the lost and lit the paths home. The heart of the horizon pulsed once more, whole, reborn, cradled now between flame and tide. Atop the temple of Equinox, now fully restored, the twin sculptures of Leviathan and Phoenix watched in eternal stillness. And once each cycle, when both moons rose high in mirrored skies, Kelter and Lyrian met there. No thrones, no guards, no spells. Just memory, and the quiet smile of two souls who had once held the world between them, and chosen not to keep it, but to heal it. Hidden Earth would never forget what almost broke it, but more importantly, it would remember who chose to put it back together.